Our first message was Send Me. So we talked about the idea, if we want to live like Jesus did, then we're going to be headed out, potentially away from safety and security. From there, Lee's messages pointed out our need to love God, to love our neighbor, and to love the unlovely. And Jesus himself breaks down who our neighbor is through the parable of the Good Samaritan. In his own life and ministry, Jesus touched the leper, the demon-possessed, the ceremonially unclean, which would be people just outcast from society, those in the midst of sinful lives, crooked government officials. There was no one too far gone for him. So if we want to live like Jesus, in addition to all those things, we should love the helpless. Our main text for this is found in James 1, and it says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." James is an entire letter that's written by the brother of Jesus who went from not believing in Jesus to being a leader in the emerging church following his brother's resurrection from the dead. And James is a great book. If you're wandering in your faith and you need just some immediate tune-up level kinds of things to do, you should read the book of James. Some great themes pop out all throughout the book. And just to name some of them, trials have a purpose. They build your faith. If you aren't wise, well, you can ask God and he'll help you with that. Your economic position doesn't determine your real value. You should listen more than you speak and do what God tells you to. You should control your mouth. Look out for the helpless. Don't be polluted by the world. What you do, not what you say, reveals what you actually believe. Your mouth is dangerous. Humility comes from wisdom. Don't envy. Submit to God. Resist the devil. Don't slander people. Trust God for your future. If you're rich, God is watching what you do with your resources. Suffering has a purpose. Prayer is powerful enough to change weather patterns. And you should help each other to follow well. That's a pretty great list of things, and since we all have them down perfectly, we don't need to read James again, right? It's a pretty daunting list of things, really. But imagine the kind of community that arises when people understand and practice those things together. It probably looks a lot like how the church is supposed to look. Have you ever known someone who had nothing bad to say about someone else? It's disarming. You feel like you can really be yourself around them. You can be honest around them. Have you ever known someone who epitomized grace in suffering? It's challenging. It makes you think that you need to toughen up a little bit. Have you ever known someone who viewed their lives and their possessions as a vehicle just to bless others, just to do good for other people? Have you ever known someone who was a person of prayer, and not the showy stuff with the these and the thous and all the words you don't understand, but that quiet kind of prayer where the knees of all of their pants are worn out and silently they're moving mountains? Well, the book of James, the message of James is transformational for us in our community when we begin to do these things. Today, though, for this message, we want to have a bit smaller of a focus. It's an interesting idea, really. James says that religion, which has such a negative connotation in our world today, but really here it's just talking about worship. What we do, how we live because of what we claim to be true. That's what James would say is worship is religion. That's most clearly expressed by serving the poor, the needy, the helpless, and by personal purity. Caring for the helpless, though, that isn't a new idea with James. It appears all throughout the Bible and seems to be close to the heart of God. Psalm 68 says, God is a father of the fatherless and protector of widows. In Zechariah, the 7th chapter, it's a book in the Old Testament, the people are being condemned because they didn't want to execute true justice, show mercy and compassion, every man to his brother, to oppress not the widow, the fatherless, the strange, and the poor, and not entertain evil thoughts against another within their hearts. In the 6th chapter of Micah, another book in the Old Testament, he complains and says that all ritual sacrifices were useless if a man didn't do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly before God. In Isaiah, the 58th chapter, which is something that a ministry here from our church grew out of, it says, this is the kind of fast day I'm after. And this is God speaking. To break the chains of injustice, get rid of exploitation in the workplace, free the oppressed, cancel debts. And what I'm interested in seeing you do is this: sharing your food with the hungry, inviting the homeless poor into your homes, putting clothes on the shivering ill-clad, being available to your own families. Do this, and the lights will turn on, and your lives will turn around at once. Your righteousness will pave your way. The God of glory will secure your passage. You'll call out for help, and I'll say, here I am. The helpless are close to the heart of God. So our takeaway just from looking at this briefly, well, that's that we can have incredibly moving experiences of worship together. We can have great Bible studies where we learn a lot. But if we aren't going out and loving God by loving people and setting a path in our lives that walks us farther and farther away from sin, we're just kidding ourselves. James sums it up by saying, tell me about your faith. That's fine, but you can demonstrate your faith by what you do, even without saying a word. In James's day, the helpless that he talks about here, I think we can expand that idea a bit, because orphans and widows had no hope then. There was no social net to catch them. So I think we can expand the idea of who are helpless people in our day and age. Some of the first people that may come to your mind are mentally disabled, physically disabled, the orphans, the elderly, those in other countries maybe with dictators in power or oppressive regimes, the terminally ill. We can look again at the people that Jesus helped. And we mentioned it before: the lepers, the demon-possessed, the ceremonially unclean, those in the midst of sinful lives, crooked government officials, prostitutes, fishermen, political rebels, the paralyzed people. So you should help all of them, and you should do all those things. In fact, let's go ahead and pray, and we'll leave and do that all together right now. No, that probably won't work today. But is there one of those things that I mentioned that maybe something in your heart moved a little bit when you heard it? Are you doing anything with that? Who are some helpless people today that move your heart, but you at this point, you aren't doing anything about it? Are you moved by people who are stuck in the throes of addiction? Did you know, I found out just a couple weeks ago, there's an organization that uses exercise as a path to help with sobriety, and they have participating gyms donate a year's membership. And so then people in this recovery program would go to a gym for a month and work out. So as they're working on their mental strength, they're working on their physical strength and getting some tangible results and trying to move forward. I think that's a great program, a great idea. Does the plight of elderly people concern you? Did you know that we have some older people in our church who could use your help and maybe even your friendship? Do orphans matter to you? Did you know this church provides relief to families who are serving the need of the fatherless, to people who are foster and adoptive parents? It's called FAPNO. It stands for Foster and Adoptive Parent Night Out, and we need volunteers almost every month for that. We allow families to come and bring their kids here, drop them off in a safe place. We take care of them, we feed them and entertain them for a few hours, and those foster and adoptive parents get to go out. And at least when Jody and I did it, always ended up being Walmart shopping, which I know is wildly romantic, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. So for a few hours every month or two, you can meet the needs of some of these families that are on the front lines dealing with our orphan crisis. If you're interested in foster care, Jody, my wife, is part of a group called Bridge of Life, and she can get you involved in a lot of different ways of serving our local foster and adoptive community. If you're interested in the plight of orphans overseas, right now Jody and Marty and some other volunteers are in Uganda, and they're building relationships in community and trying to help strengthen communities to produce better families and to work against this orphan crisis that's going on there. You know, if you're going to live your life following God and claim to be a Christian, if you and I are going to do that, then I think we have to make one assumption, and that's that God is better than you and he's better than me in every possible way imaginable. He's smarter, he's stronger, his understanding of right and wrong are better than mine, better than yours. He knows what's best, not just for me, not just for you, but for every living thing that has ever or will ever live in the entirety of the cosmos. When God calls you to do something in service of him, he's going to empower you beyond what you would normally be capable of on your own. There's a couple at my gym, and the lady's still working out, and she is very, 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 lots more varies, pregnant, to the point that I'm scared to work out near her because I'm afraid her water might break. She's just incredibly pregnant, and she's still in there working out. they don't know what it's like to be parents yet. It's their first child, and with the exception of maybe a few sleepless nights. But Jody sent me this hysterical meme a couple weeks ago that I want to share with you guys. So if you can't read that, well, you can read it's huge, but we lost that picture. So expecting parent says, what's parenting like? Parent says, it's a bit like a merry-go-round. The expecting parent says, and the parent says, I'm not finished. And that's a merry-go-round. I mean, parenting's hard, right? You know, if your kids are gone, just think back a few years to what it was like when they were in your house. It's not an easy job. The problem with getting memes, though, is I fall down the meme rabbit hole of all these other ones. So there are some other great ones I wanted to share with you. We got a couple more. So I love that one. We were at the Bridge of Life did that superhero 5K up at Benderson last week, and they had a booth there, and it's a kid-friendly event, so people are bringing their kids, and the booth was actually teaching children how to make kazoos. It was hard not to hit those people. I mean, what child needs more noisemakers, you know? So, and then this last one. So in our family, Christina used to always do that, who's my youngest, and nobody gets up in the middle of the night and their hair looks perfectly straight. So it was just all like this, and you see a silhouette at the door that looks like a banshee that's just standing there staring at you. It's great fun parenting. One of my favorite comedians, Jim Gaffigan, says this about parenting. He says, you want to know what it's like to have a fourth kid? Imagine you're drowning and someone hands you a baby. So parenting is hard, no matter where your kids come from, if they're biological, if they're adoptive or foster. Our family, Jody and I, we've been in hospital waiting rooms praying for our biological kids and our adoptive kids. We've cried for our biological kids and our adoptive kids. We've been saddened by both biological and adoptive children. I've been proud of my biological and my adoptive kids. And Jody would probably add a third category of, I've been frustrated with my biological and adoptive kids, but I've also wanted to kill Ray before. So if we can just admit that parenting is hard, no matter what, unless you just choose to check out as a parent and you don't actually do anything. There's encouragement for you today, because if you think back to that movie from the 80s, E.T., the mom in that movie, she had an alien living in her house for a couple of days before she even realized it. And she was still a pretty good mom, right? So parenting is a job where you've had no previous experience, you can't quit, there's no training, and people's lives are at stake. My kids, they've done so many frustrating things to me. I actually have a note in my phone of things that I'm going to do back to them when they have their own house. One of my favorites is I'm going to take a grapefruit, shove it down the toilet, and not tell anybody. Because a couple of weeks ago, Christina decided, I think a grapefruit will be better, but Christina decided to take a bite of a pear, and she didn't really want it, and she knew we'd make them eat it because we don't waste food at our house. And so she flushed it. And if you've ever tried to plunge a pear down a toilet, it actually doesn't work. It won't go down no matter what you do. So I'm definitely getting her back on that one. But you struggle through a whole day of working with your kids and trying to love them and trying to provide for them. And then you get to bedtime and kids turn into these thirsty philosophers that just need one more hug. And it just seems to be never ending, right? One of the things that I hear over and over again about foster care is, I couldn't do that because it might be hard, or I'm scared of that. And I think you have good reason to feel that way, but parenting, no matter who the kids are, it's going to be difficult. I was talking to Asa this week, and I was telling him I'm preaching this weekend, and he wanted to know what I was preaching about. So I said, well, I'm preaching about the helpless. And he said, okay. And I said, and you're going to be in it. And he said, you're calling me helpless? And so I had to quickly explain. No, I would never say that one of my children was helpless in public. The year after he was born, we were living in Florida, and we still only had one car. It was this two-door Honda Accord. And to get his car seat in, he was 6 months old, so he had the carrier that snaps into the thing in the back seat. To get his car seat in, you had to lean the driver's seat forward. You had to go around to the passenger side and lay the front seat down and pull the headrest out, slide the car seat in, lean the passenger seat back forward, put the headrest back in, and lean the driver's seat back forward. So if Jody ever wanted to drive, which sometimes happened because she was pregnant with Gretchen, then I would have to sit in the passenger seat with my knees basically touching my nose because Asa was behind me. But, so we figured out how to maneuver through all that, and then one day we're in our apartment. I look out the window, and the driver's side window is down, and I don't usually leave the windows down, so I went out, turned on the car, tried to get it rolling, and the window wouldn't go up. So with my engineering mind, I quickly fixed it by taking the door panel off and jamming a 2x4 under the window to hold it up. So now the window doesn't go down at all, and our air condition died, and my wife was pregnant, and it was Florida in the summer. So pretty much she gets to go to heaven no matter what she does for the rest of her life. But we went through all that, and then she got pregnant, and God was faithful, though. He provided a great van for us that we bought from Jody's sister. It was a Honda Odyssey. It had low mileage on it, and she gave us the great family discount. But as Jody was driving it home here from Indiana, the transmission started going out, which was like a $7,000 repair. And we paid just a little bit more than that for the whole van, which was incredibly frustrating. But again, God was faithful. I talked to probably every customer service under the employ of Honda of America and wherever else they are. But they ended up covering the repair of that. So God was faithful. One day, Jody was riding in the van, and Asa and Gretchen are in the back, and he's sitting in his seat, kicking his little legs, and he looks around and says, "Mommy, who are those seats for?" And there are 5 seats in the back of the van, and there were only 2 that were occupied, and he saw those 3 empty seats and realized that there was something wrong, and he told Jody he was going to start praying that we would have more babies. In a lot of ways, that's both the beginning and the end of the story of our family increasing. Not long after that, we found out about a teenage girl in this church who had been fostered but was ready to be adopted. So Jody and I started praying about it separately. We didn't talk to each other about it. And then one day it was like one of those Hollywood movies where 2 people come together and they say, "I have to tell you something." And so we prayed about it some more together, and we decided that we would pursue that and see what happened. We took classes both in Sarasota and Venice. We kind of doubled up to sort of get the class done in order to do this fostering thing. But before those classes ended, her situation changed. She wasn't available for adoption anymore. But we had heard about these 6 kids who came into the foster system. 3 were placed with a family here at church, and then 3 were spread out. And the coalition, which is the group that handles foster cases, they wanted to have all 3 of those together. So we began praying about it, and I was super reluctant at first. But not long after that, God filled those 3 seats in the back of our van. Over the next 4 months or so, our family grew from 4 to 7, and Brittany arrived in time to start her kindergarten year of school with us, and she's in 8th grade now. I used to not even like kids or babies in particular. I traveled with this musical PR group in college, and I'm not kidding you, the girls used to go get babies from the churches we'd visit and walk them over to me just to see me react by running away or, acting like they had the plague. And now I have to remind myself that total strangers don't really want you to play with their kids or babies if they don't know you. It sometimes makes them react by running away. Over the next couple of years, God expanded our parenting capacity, and we were able to adopt all 6 of those siblings. There are a lot of needs in a family of 10, and this church stepped up in such a huge way with an adoption shower, with constant investment in the lives of our kids. People taught our kids to swim, to drive. We had hand-me-downs coming our way. We had free babysitters, gift cards to restaurants. People showed up randomly with groceries in their car for us. People gave us computers. One family even allowed us to live with them for a while we waited on our house to close. God moved and provided a great house for us that was a short sale, something we would have never been able to afford. It needed a lot of work, but it had enough bedrooms for our mega family. And yet again, God mobilized his people, the people here at this church, to help us get the house ready and be livable. I see very clearly from the beginning of that a line of supernatural provision in the life of our family as we chose to trust God and to step out beyond our capabilities. It makes me uncomfortable to talk about our story sometimes because I know it's a little bit outrageous. Even though I stand in front of you guys every week and lead worship, I don't really like to be the center of attention. I don't like extra attention. But I like directing attention toward the things that God did. And he's done some amazing things in our hearts and in our family. We had sort of a basic amount of parenting capacity, but we were willing to do something outside of our comfort zone to serve some of these helpless people. And because of that, God blessed us and has continued to bless us and has increased our capacity. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells this great parable of the talents. And he says it's like a man going off on an extended trip. He called his servants together and delegated responsibilities. To one he gave $5,000, to another $2,000, to a third $1,000, and depending on their abilities. Then he left right off. The first servant went to work and doubled his master's investment. The second did the same, but the man with a single $1,000 dug a hole and carefully buried his master's money. After a long absence, the master of those 3 servants came back and settled up with them. The one given $5,000 showed him how he doubled his investment, and his master commended him. Good work. You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant with the $2,000 showed him also how he had doubled his master's investment. His master commended him. Good work. You did your job well. From now on, be my partner. The servant given $1,000 said, Master, I know you have a high standard and hate careless ways, and that you demand the best and make no allowances for error. I was afraid I might disappoint you, so I found a good hiding place and secured your money. Here it is, safe and sound, down to the last cent. Well, the master was furious, and that's a terrible way to live. It's criminal to live cautiously like that. If you knew I was after the best, why did you do less than the least? The least you could have done would have been to invest the sum with the bankers, where at least I would have gotten a little interest. Take the $1,000 and give it to the one who risked the most, and get rid of this play it safe who won't go out on a limb. Throw him out into utter darkness. I noticed something as I was reading through this parable this week, that God didn't expect anyone or anything from those people until he had first entrusted them with something. You've been entrusted with a life. And God is expecting all of us to do something with what we've been given. If you've been at this church for a while, you might remember a couple that's 2 of my favorite people, Jack and Polly Long. And they used to sit right over there, and they started foster care. They started being foster parents back when it was, do you want to be a foster parent? Okay, there you go. And over decades, they have served so many kids from our community. And in their 60s, they were still finalizing adoptions. And to me, that's just wildly inspirational and something I hope I'm able to do. There's a character from church history named Brother Lawrence. He wasn't a great speaker, wasn't very charismatic, but he just decided that every day he was going to do everything, being aware of the presence of God and saying, I'm doing this because of the love of God. So whether it was washing dishes or talking to people, meeting whoever's needs, he chose to do all of that with the idea in mind that God was present and he was doing it out of love for him. His story from back in the 1600s inspired this book that was written called In His Steps. It's a fictional book where the author sort of imagines what would it be like in a town if everyone from a particular church decided, I'm going to live today asking the question, were Jesus in my position, what would he do? And if that story is not familiar to you, you might be familiar with the craze that happened in the 90s of the WWJD bracelets. And that's what that came from. So here you have this monk from the 1600s who impacted the church for hundreds of years and even affects us still today, just because he chose to be consciously aware of the fact that God was with him. So how would Jesus respond were he in our place to the helpless? Loving the helpless means you're going to do for people who can never repay you. The Department of Agriculture said in 2015 that to raise a child from the age of birth through 17 would cost about $233,000. Getting involved is going to cost you something. Rick Rousseau is a pastor out in Longmont, Colorado. And he challenged his church to get involved in their community. And so they started asking how they could help at schools, how they could help in the foster care system in lots of different ways. And for a long time, people kept saying, we don't really know what a church could accomplish. We're not really interested in your help. And we're standoffish from them. But after some time of persistence and God's grace showing up, they started to get involved. And because of their involvement in December of 2008, for the first time in almost 3 decades, Boulder County had enough homes and families for all of the kids that were in foster care. And that's amazing, just from people saying, how can I help? How can I get involved? There are 400,540 kids in the United States right now in the foster care system. That means that based on the number of active churches that there are in the United States, if one family from every church would just say yes to adoption or foster care, we as the church could end that crisis. I don't know about you, but that seems like pretty basic math to me. That's a social problem that the church could solve almost overnight if we would just say yes. True religion is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. You know, being a dad of 8 is challenging on lots of different levels. But I have moments with them that I would not trade for anything in the world. Because I've said yes, I have this great wall in my office that I'd love to have you come over and see sometime. It's just pictures that my kids have drawn for me. And some of them are terrible. They don't look like anything. But they remind me of these beautiful kids that God has entrusted to me. Because I've said yes, this is what our family looked like when we first said yes. And this is what it looks like now. The one on the far right is Sarah, and at that point she was still pregnant with Nehemiah, so I have a grandson that's not even in that picture. I wouldn't trade them or the life that God has blessed us with for anything. You know, that verse goes on to say that true religion is also to keep yourself from being polluted by the world. And the world is selfish. You know, I know me. I know that it's in my nature to be selfish. And I need to consciously decide every day to put myself in situations that make it hard for me to be that way. I don't go to the gym because I'm strong. I go to the gym to avoid being weak. If you serve other people, you can kind of put a buffer between you and being selfish by meeting their needs and taking the focus off yourself. A few years ago on my birthday, I felt like I needed some kind of a change. You know, as you get older, birthdays sort of shift in their meaning, and I didn't want the focus to be on me. I want my perspective to be that every year I evaluate and see, is the world a better place because I'm in it? So I decided that I would start giving gifts on my birthday to my family instead of receiving them. Nothing extravagant, just something to be a reminder for me to take the focus off of myself. That may sound generous and like, wow, that's really cool that he did that. But understand that came out of a brokenness in me that allows the focus to shift on me if I don't work to shift it off of myself. This year, it caught on though, which was pretty fun to watch. One of my kids just this month actually asked on his birthday if he could go to Walmart to buy presents with his own money for everybody else. What you do, how you live, it has a chance to affect future generations beyond you. Set an example, leave a legacy of extravagant love for the helpless. So pure religion is to look after the helpless, keep yourself from being polluted. And when you think about helpless, what are you doing for that group that moves your heart, that makes you feel like you need to do something? And then last, I'd just like to ask all of us, do our lives really look that different from the world? Do our lives look that different because of what Jesus has done for us? Worship in here can't replace worship that happens out there. And God says that we can worship him with our lives by looking out for